Welcome back. We continue with our evaluation of the budget 2025-2026. Of course, in retrospect with the Finance Bill 2025, which will be used to finance the budget. I'm still in studio with the experts. Allow me to reintroduce them. We're joined by Gideon Rotich, an Associate Director of Tax and Legal Services at PwC, Churchill Ogutu, who's an economist with the IC Group, equally joined by Dr. Stephen Gashie, an economist, an expert on debt and sustainability, and Professor Exene Iraki, a lecturer, economist, and columnist with The Standard. And just to break down for you, in terms of the government spending priorities, education sector will get almost 28% of the national budget. That's roughly 702 billion shillings, 217 billion for construction of roads across the country. The agricultural sector gets a proposed allocation of 47.6 billion shillings. UHC proposed allocation is 138.1 billion shillings, up from 123 in the current budget. 202.3 billion for defense, and those are some of the biggest winners in terms of allocations, and you can see some of the figures on your screens right now. But allow us to engage Dr. Stephen Gashie, especially on matters to do with the controversial tax measures. We just heard about the Clause 52 in terms of granting carriers and access to some personal data. Talk to us about that, but equally, I'd like to take on the moving of some of these goods from zero rated to tax exempt and standard rated, that's 16% VAT. Any economical repercussions? Yeah.
Thank you. I'll start with what you just called winners.
Yeah.
And then I think we need to have an operational definition of winners because it's based on the numbers.
Okay, sorry. I have to cut you short due to our own issues, but we'll be coming back to you. Perhaps let me focus the question to Professor Exene Iraki. What's your take on the moving of some of these goods from, zero rated to tax exempt and the standard rated 16% VAT? What are the economical repercussions you foresee?
I think when you remove taxes or add taxes, it has a very big effect on the demand. It has a very big effect on the prices. So by jacking around by getting some items to be zero rated, others to be exempt and so on, you are interfering with supply and demand. And sometimes, depending on the tax you put or the tax you remove, it has an effect on the prices. And I think it's a time we stopped using jargons when we are talking to the Kenyan public. Because if you ask a Kenyan on the streets what is zero rated, what is tax exempt, unless you are sitting to teach there to explain that to you because he's a tax expert, a lot of people don't know what it's all about. Yeah. But basically, when you juggle around with taxes, you can either discourage consumption or discourage or encourage consumption. And that has always an effect on the prices. And by extension, the cost of living goes up or goes down.
Okay.
But what we need to do is to make sure that whatever we write in the tax documents is understandable to the common person. Because that's why you are finding a lot of people not going for public participation. Because they'll go and sit there, people talk over their head, they don't know what they're talking about. But I think the government needs to be very clear on exactly what should be tax exempt, what should be zero rated, and so on, so that the consumers, the businessmen, whether they are big or small, know exactly how to react to that. But the good thing is you have a tax expert next to you who has been doing that all the time.
Okay.
So that was probably the most appropriate question for him.
All right. Pick it up, Gideon.
Yeah. No, thanks. Thanks for that. So, maybe he did mention about really having the public know. So maybe where I want to start with is that the government released 2 documents last year, the medium-term revenue strategy paper and the national tax policy paper. So you did mention about items that are moving from being exempt to zero, from zero to exempt, and then others from exempt to standard rate, yeah? When I critically look at some of the examples that are moving, some goes against, I will call it the government policy. So I'll give you examples. So there's an item like equipment for construction of specialized hospitals. It was previously exempt, now it's being taken to 16%. So yes, being exempt, there was no VAT on it, but then the manufacturers were not able to claim input, but then there was still a VAT reprieve. But now it's been taken to 16%. What does that mean to the healthcare over and above the budget that is being constrained? So then again, from a tourism perspective, quite a lot equipment used for construction of recreational facilities again is being suggested to be taxed. Looking again at it from an agricultural and health perspective, there are certain inputs, like inputs for manufacture of pharmaceutical products, currently zero rated, but there's a proposed move to exempt. When you look at, again, from an agricultural inputs for manufacture of agricultural products, pesticides, moving from zero to exempt. What does this mean? So zero rating is ideally a tax incentive that is granted to manufacturers where you are told you're able to recover your input, so don't pass it on to the final consumer, okay? So it's really an incentive to spur growth in that specific sector, okay? As opposed to exemption. Now, looking at the medium-term revenue strategy paper I did mention is the government seeks to limit exemption to very critical sectors. Health should be a critical sector. Agriculture, as mentioned, it's the mainstream of the Kenyan economy. Over 20% of the GDP comes from agriculture. So there should be ideal incentives towards those very targeted sectors as opposed to really withdrawing them. So as government, I believe what they need to do is have the certainty, look at those very critical sectors that require incentives for you to spur growth in those specific sectors.
You had mentioned something about controversial issues still within this finance bill and whatnot. Just encompass them briefly before you cross over to,
okay. Yeah, so again, there are two other items from a controversial perspective. So when you look at the tax dispute process in Kenya, so if as a taxpayer you've received an assessment from the Revenue Authority, you can appeal to what is now known as the Tax Appeals Tribunal, okay? Now, once you appeal at the Tax Appeals Tribunal, once they render a decision, you have again two options. So you can head directly to the High Court. So there's a proposal which says if you lose as a taxpayer at the Tax Appeals Tribunal, then the Revenue Authority has a right to issue an urgency notice without even you now having gone to the High Court. So what ideally you need to do is quickly rush to court, seek a stay order for the Revenue Authority not to gag your accounts. Then there's another controversial, again, proposal targeting non-residents. So again, giving power to KRA to issue agency notices to non-residents. What ideally, an agency notice means your accounts are frozen. Okay, or if someone owes you money, I can tell that person that if you need to pay X person, please remit those funds directly to the Revenue Authority. I believe that again goes counterproductive. We are trying to attract investors into the country, but then there are certain policies that we are making that I believe could be counterproductive to some of the policies we are trying to make.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's listen from Dr. Gashie, because I cut him short earlier on. As you finalize on your point previously, talk to us about this common narrative that Kenya and Africa does not have a debt problem. We have a cost of debt problem. And right now, we well know that our debt is pegged at a debt anchor of 55% against our GDP in present value terms. Evaluate the issue of debt sustainability, knowing very well we'll have to borrow, whether it's locally or foreign, in order to breach the budget deficit here.
Okay, thank you. I think I was on a point where I was saying we need to operationalize the definition of winners and losers based on the numbers, not on the dictionary meaning. Why? If you look at what we call now the winners, education, maybe health, and we look at the budget, the year that is heading now, 2024, who are struggling and who are winners last year budget? Same sectors. If you look at education, we are talking about capitation, and yet last year, the budget 2024, 2025, they were the winners. So I think the issue that must be addressed is availability of resources. When you have resources, then everyone will be a winner, because the CS also talked about liquidity problem. And that's the engine. That's the oil that drives the economy. And when we have that, then we'll have all losers. So we go to debt. I think in Africa, including Kenya, what we have is the issue of being frugal. Frugal meaning efficient with the resources that we have. Number two, it's how we spend our resources. and also our credibility. Because remember, we borrow from people who are looking at us. For example, if you see today we had a budget and we had a split screen. So if you look at that economy, and the day they are doing the budget, there's a time we have another issue, and the global partners who are supposed to give us that, then I think also we need to look at the political environment so that we are able to be predictable. For example, currently now, if you look at our political environment, it's not predictable. There will be a lot of wait and see what will happen in 2027. Why then sustainability of debt? I think we need to interrogate our debt portfolio, because if the budget proposes to borrow about 600 billion from domestic, meaning Gideon, professor here, and I will struggle to convince a bank to give us money, and even the corporate, so that it can be able to capitalize the business. Most likely we are going to have what we call the crowding effect, where it's like when you have a toddler, you are doing lunch together in the same plate. Who will feel first? It's the same, because the government it's in the market to borrow money.
Yeah.
And also the corporations are there to borrow money. But as a banker, we'll be saying now, where is the most risk lying and the cost of chasing for the same? So for me, I think what CS is trying to do is good, try to create efficiency on a correction of taxes. However, that controversial issue about data privacy, from experience, what happened when there was, I think, was it ATM invoices? You go to town, go to River Road, where you used to have pay bills and till numbers. Today you are being Tuma withdraw the money. Yes. Meaning, most likely, we'll have a lot of under the matrix banking, where people will want to keep their money so that you move from where KLA is good to look at you and tell you, Dr. Gashino, you are high net value Kenyan, and what you are declaring is not reflecting of that. So I think there need to be another strategy to motivate people to pay. And people, I bought from Moi Kibaki. You remember, kulipa ushuru ni kujitegemea, because people would see where the money is going. So I think that is an issue. But for me, our debt is not sustainable. It is not sustainable because we are digging a hole to fill the other. So we still have a hole to fill. And maybe we look for maybe concession loans, because commercial, like Euroboats, then become very expensive. Borrowing domestic also, interest rates, remember, although the interest rates, like what Professor indicated, it's going down, of course, with the MPC yesterday or the day before, it's a review to 9.75. But you look at the data then, it's also saying that those people who are borrowing has reduced.
Okay.
And non-performing loans are also going up.
And non-performance loans are also going up. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Because I'm really enjoying the discussion. This discussion, debt. You know, I don't envy the position of our policymakers and CS, because here you are telling Kenyans there's too much debt. So the only way to reduce that debt is to pay more taxes. And then you end up saying that you don't trust Kenyans to pay taxes. So it's a very controversial issue. But then you also tell them, if you want to pay more taxes, you can take austerity measures. And austerity measures means you reduce, for example, the number of government workers, and there will be some political backlash. So either way, you need to do some balancing. But let me go back to the issue of trust, because I think that's very important. Why is there a trust deficit? I have never come across any Kenyan who said he doesn't want to pay taxes. All Kenyans want to pay taxes, but they want to know where the tax goes. And I know in some countries where you pay as much as 50%, 60% of your taxes, and nobody complains. Because you go to hospitals, you find drugs, their roads are there. I've even visited a country where I saw a billboard saying, if you see a pothole, call this number. So those people never complain because tax goes into where it's supposed to go. And that's what KRA needs to do. Let's see where the money goes. We are going to pay taxes without being forced. And what we are saying here at the end of the day is that there is an issue of compliance versus expanding the pool of taxpayers. So what KRI needs to do is to balance. Although you are telling us to comply, let's also loop more people into the tax payment regime. And how do you do that? By making sure that KRI and taxpayers' relationship is symbiotic, not militaristic. And I'll give you a good example that I found recently. I keep some chicken, and they have been refusing to lay eggs. Then I decided every evening I'll be opening for them. I'm getting more eggs.
Yeah.
So by giving Kenyans freedom and showing them that you trust them, they will probably pay more taxes than telling them that you don't trust them. Because I believe trust is built, and that's what KRA should be doing. But telling Kenyans who sustain the government that they cannot trust them is, in my opinion, not fair.
Okay, Churchill, let's talk about mobilizing revenues to counties through this equitable, shareable revenue, because there's been a back and forth on this particular matter. I think the National Assembly was proposing 405 billion thereabout, the Senate pushing for a higher figure of 465 billion in terms of allocation to counties. We expect a mediation committee to be set up. But what's your analysis generally of the past 2 years, including the next financial year, of money following functions?
Yeah, thanks. So the issue around equitable revenue to counties is a year in, year out occurrence. Even case in point, even last year, that also played out. And you find that they need to come to an agreement, these two bicameral houses, on the way going forward, because it can't be like each and every year we are still dealing with the same issue. So National Treasury proposed 405 billion, and this is actually coming from the ordinary revenue, the numbers that was there in terms of what will be collected over the next financial year, split between national government, there's a portion equalization fund, and also the other bit now going towards counties, and then Senate coming with a staggering 60 billion more than that. So from this mediation committee, we'll get, they will midwife a number in between those two figures, somewhere between the 405 billion and 465 billion. So that is also some pressure, even going forward from a spending plan. And already, we already have the overall budget plan at 4.29 trillion. So that is also some additional pressure that is coming out. But if you look at what gets to the counties in terms of the equitable revenue share, which is quite significant, I think 85% of that, and then they also have their own source revenue that they need to be able to generate on their own. So that also needs to be ramped up in a way that it also some balancing act, in the sense that it doesn't also come in the way of national government tax collection. So you can imagine you're a business in the county, you have taxes to the national government and also some level of levies and those other fees to the counties. So it just increases your cost of doing business. So that is a challenging point that even the counties are finding themselves. But having said that, to the other bit about the Constitution of Kenya, 2010 also delegated some of the functions to counties. But here we still have some sort of hybrid in terms of some of the functions. Case in point, health. You find that some of the health facilities or some of the health units are at the national level. Kenyatta National Hospital, that's the referral. So that is the national government function in a way. Yet we have counties now dealing with the other level from level 4 or 3 to the lower. So that is also another thing that is coming at play. So I think that the distinction of functions needs to be quite clear, more so in those sectors that are having overlapping mandates, so that we can now be able to reduce some of this bickering between the bicameral houses, because it's just stemming from the fact that some of these functions are still not clear, and they keep on bringing about a recurrence of this issue. The other thing also around equitable revenue share, and also which you've seen in the last 2 financial years, is that they never even get 100% what has been allocated to them. So you normally get what we call carryovers. You saw it in fiscal year 23, 24, and also the current financial year 24-25, some spillovers from the previous financial years. And as it is, even in the current financial year, there could be that, there's a likelihood that it may end the next financial year, which is ending in 2 weeks' time anyway, without the full 300 and, initially it was 387 billion, and then some carryovers, so totaling 418 billion. 100% of it will not have gone to the counties, so that will also create another problem. So even that needs to be sorted amidst the discussion around the mediation, around what eventually will go to the counties.
Okay. There seems to be emphasis on clearance of pending bills, and I don't know if we're getting it right. Just borrowing from what the Cabinet Secretary had to say, he said that I think there's a clearing committee that is supposed to sort out eligible bills. There are some that were cleared. Was it under 5 million or under 10 million? You know, so there's a semblance of progress when it comes to clearing of pending bills. Gideon, how should we go about this? Because it's a major issue, not just at the national, but at the county level as well. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, thank you. No, fully agree with you that the pending bills is a major issue. And maybe I'll connect that with the zero-based budgeting. So the zero-based budgeting is ideally where you're coming from, where you're saying you're costing for specific projects, okay? So it's not a carryover of certain projects that were not completed. So it is you really saying, this is what I need and detailing, okay? So that's a zero-based budget. But then I'm not too sure whether this current budget was actually zero-based, because it seems there are so many items that were really carryover. But then looking at the pending bills, the CS did acknowledge that at the national government level, we have around 579 billion worth of pending bills. The committee has verified over 230 billion worth of pending bills. But then what the CS didn't mention is the allocation that goes towards pending bills. So he acknowledged that yes, 230 is actually verified and payable. Now that one is being taken over to Cabinet, okay? To Cabinet for approval. What that means is where shall government get the 230 billion to fund this pending bill? So I think it will, again, just continue being a crisis unless it is solved. I know there are certain institutional reforms that the CS again did mention, maybe from a state corporation perspective, merging some of the state corporations. So perhaps government is thinking of getting some of the funds from that front, but I believe the pending issue bills should be one that is of high priority, because remember, if you get the 230 billion back to the Kenyan economy, that will stimulate economy, okay? So there'll be so much movement in terms of cash, buying goods and services, so the economy will really stimulate. But then CS just mentioned that acknowledging it's 230 billion, but no specific allocation even in this current budget of how much they're going to pay for the pending bills.
Okay, Dr. Gashie, should we give the government its flowers? Looking at the figures, we hear of a reduction of the inflation rate. We take a look at the foreign exchange and how the Kenya shilling is doing. We seem to be doing better. I guess my question would be, especially on this inflation rate, is it that people's spending power has been affected? That's why perhaps they're not spending and inflation rate is going down, or the government is doing something proper to bring these figures down? What's your analysis of it?
If you look at the drivers of inflation, one of them is the cost.
Cost of energy, yeah.
Number two is what we call demand-driven inflation. And how it works is that if it's a law of demand and supply. So how it works is that when the demand for goods is slow, then inflation drops. And I think that is the case that we have. That what is it is that people have their purchasing power has been reduced so much so that they are not able to demand to buy goods. And it's very indicative when you look at how VAT performed. Because VAT is a consumption tax. So if the tax is declining, it means people are not consuming. Why? Because they are not buying, meaning the demand is low, meaning now the inflation will drop. Otherwise, if it's the case, because the economic fundamental says that when inflation is low, people are buying more because you are saving more. But this case now, people are not buying. Number two, you spoke about, we can give them the government flowers on the exchange rate, because it has been fairly stable. However, I don't agree when they speak about the forex reserve, because we must interrogate what is our sources of forex confectionery. It should be from exports, maybe of course diaspora remittance. However, if you look at the highest consumers of forex is manufacturing, and the data says manufacturing is doing poorly, meaning there is no demand for dollar to import raw materials. So that could be one of the issues that why maybe we have increased forex. Number two, we lost a market for Uganda for oil.
All right.
So again, the demand. If you look at how economy is doing at the corporates, their profitability apart from the banking sector because of their ready to the government means maybe a lot of the companies, the shareholders, are not repatriating their profits to their, meaning there is low demand for dollar. So for me, I think as we celebrate the forex, we need to interrogate why, because the agriculture, the horticulture, the tourism is not doing as much where we get the source. However, that's why I say we need to interrogate. Diaspora remittance has overtaken agriculture, tourism, mining, and export as a source of dollars.
Interesting. Prof, as we finalize, I'd like your take on the e-procurement system, because according to CS Mbadi, he said by 1st July 2025, all procurement by ministries, department, and state agencies should be through the e-government procurement system, enhancing transparency, accountability, and all that. A good step, yeah?
I think that was long overdue.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that, we rarely give government credit, but I think one of the areas where the government has done very well is digitalization. Mm-hmm. If some of you can remember how we used to get some government services without Huduma Center, it was very difficult. But with Huduma Centers, when they are working very well, a lot of services are easy to get, national IDs, passport application, and so on. So it logically follows that if the government has been doing that, including IFMIS, then procurement should be online. So what we are hoping is that by having procurement being done online, and some organizations are already doing that, mm-hmm. There are some companies whose procurement is completely automated online. We are going to have to make it more efficient. We are going to remove discretionary decisions, and we expect to be more efficient. Remember, one of the areas where a lot of corruption takes place is in procurement. So if this can be implemented to the letter and to the spirit, I think we expect to see some changes in the government expenditure. Remember that we are talking about austerity measures, and this would be a very good approach. So I'm looking forward to the day when this will be implemented, 1st of July. And maybe by this time next year, we shall be saying, yes, things have changed.
Hopefully. Let's give them the benefit of doubt. Gentlemen, our time is up, but I'd like to give you 30 seconds each. I'm sure my director is frowning upon me. But as we finalize this conversation, all things said and done, we've seen the focus areas under the BETTER program, fertilizer subsidy, boosting our food value chain, social health programs, affordable housing program, and institutional housing. Perhaps a general overview as we finalize of the outlook for the 2025-2026 financial year from where you sit. 30 seconds kindly each. Gideon, let's start with you.
Well, thank you. So mine is from a tax perspective, I would like to see the government from a predictable perspective, have a very predictable tax environment where investors can plan their affairs for over 3, 4, 5 years without the disruptions that we foresee. And as Prof earlier mentioned, maybe allocate more time to the CS next year before he starts giving the current year's budget. Mm-hmm. Really spend some time in terms of the previous year's numbers, even including really where the budget was not consumed, what really happened. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well noted. Thank you for keeping time. Churchill.
Well, I think the budget is being executed amidst a challenging environment, so we are still not yet out of the woods, so that's something that the National Treasury has to be alive to in terms of the budget going forward. And implementation, it all boils down to implementation of the budget so that we don't see these other things cropping up, such as supplementary budget. So if they get the implementation right, I think that will be beneficial to Mwananchi, and that will make everyone to be winners, the winners, losers discussions that you brought about.
Exactly. Asante sana, Dr. Gashie.
Same here, I said I have a bias to M&E. So we'll be looking at the implementation and the collect theories of change so that they will get the desirable outcome.
Asante. Prof.
I think the budget should be about stimulating economic growth. We want growth because if there's growth, there will be jobs. If there are more jobs, there will be economics, there will be stability. So let's create jobs by having a very conducive environment for the investors, whether they are big, whether they are small. After all, charity starts at home.
Asanteni sana. Thank you for dotting the I's, crossing the T's, as they say, analyzing the budget and some of the expectations around the Finance Bill 2025. Prof. Exen Iraki is an economist and a lecturer, equally a columnist at The Standard, equally joined by Dr. Stephen Gashie. Thank you so much for your input. He's an economist focusing on debt and sustainability, equally joined by Chachi Loguto, an economist with the IC Group. We appreciate your input. And Gideon Rotich, an associate director of tax and legal services at PwC. That marks the end of the deliberations right here in studio, but the show goes on. As we come back from the break, we continue breaking down some of the key developments news-wise that played out in the country. To keep it KTN Prime.